The cafe smelled like burnt espresso and ambition. Karoline Leavitt sat at a corner table, tapping a manicured nail against the rim of her porcelain cup. She had shown up 10 minutes early for her shift. As usual, the apron pressed and folded, sat neatly in her tote bag beside a copy of the Federalist Papers. The cafe manager, Lou short for Louise, was already watching her from behind the counter with that usual combination of suspicion and passive contempt. Karoline wasn't new to the tension. She had taken the job 2 months ago. Shortly after moving back to New Hampshire from D.C., her husband, Davis, was still splitting time between here and New York. She didn't need the money. God knows that wasn't the reason, but she liked the rhythm of the cafe, the smell of cinnamon scones, the morning rush of tired regulars. What she didn't like, however, was Lou. Lou wore her politics like a bumper sticker slapped on her forehead, rainbow pin on her apron, Bernie mug, and a tone of condescension saved especially for Karoline every time she mentioned anything remotely conservative. She'd sneer, whisper to the college baristas, and blast NPR loud enough for everyone to hear the latest op-ed dressed as news. That morning, Karoline sensed something different. Lou's eyes were sharper, the kind of glint you see in people who have decided on something final. At 9:03, just 3 minutes after Karoline clocked in, Lou called her into the back office. The office smelled like lavender sanitizer and guilt. Lou didn't look up from the monitor when she spoke. I think this just isn't working out. Karoline blinked. Excuse me. You're divisive. Customers feel uncomfortable. Staff does too. Because of my opinions. Lou's smile was rehearsed, almost pitying. Because of your vibe. Karoline inhaled slowly. I show up early. I stay late. I clean up other people's stations. My till has never been off. What exactly have I done wrong? Lou clicked her pen and shrugged. It's not a good culture fit. Let's call it that. Karoline stood there for a long second. She wanted to say something sharp, something that would burn on the way out. But instead, she just said, okay. She walked out with her chin high, her apron still folded in the tote. That night, she told Davis. He listened without speaking, just nodding as he poured her a glass of wine. He always knew the challenges she faced. Being bold in today's world didn't earn you applause, earned you whispers, side eyes, and in her case, a pink slip from a self-proclaimed ally of tolerance. The next morning was quiet. The cafe opened at 8, and the early crowd of dog walkers and remote workers took their usual seats on the patio. Lou unlocked the door, apron already tied, hair in that same tight knot. She sipped her coffee and looked out at the road. At 8:17, a hum filled the air, not the kind of hum you get from traffic or delivery vans, but the deep, rolling purr of something heavier. All eyes turned as a Rolls-Royce Ghost, gleaming in obsidian black, coasted down the street. The sunlight caught its chrome like diamonds. In motion, it pulled right into the lot, wheels gliding with silent arrogance. Lou squinted, then scoffed. Who the hell drives a Rolls here? The driver's door opened, and Davis Leavitt stepped out, all 6'3" of him, in a tailored navy coat and sunglasses that probably cost more than Lou's monthly rent. He didn't glance at the cafe at first, just checked his watch, adjusted his cufflinks, then he looked up. Lou stiffened. Davis didn't approach. He just leaned against the car, arms folded. The cafe went quiet, people pretending not to stare. Then, the passenger door opened. Karoline stepped out, radiant in white, linen and gold hoops, holding a small coffee cup she'd picked up from the nicer cafe down the block. She looked over at Lou, who was now frozen behind the counter. Karoline didn't smile. She didn't wave, she just looked. A still, patient look that said more than any speech she could have given. She turned to Davis, whispered something, and they both climbed back into the car. The Rolls pulled away slowly, its reflection lingering in the cafe's glass. By noon, everyone in town had heard about it. It wasn't just the carrot, was the message. You don't get to silence people and expect them to stay small. You don't get to pretend you're the moral superior, while you cancel someone for disagreeing with you. Lou didn't say much. The rest of the day, she was quiet, tapping at her phone between orders, her shoulders tight. The staff whispered more than usual. A few regulars asked what had happened to that nice conservative girl. That weekend, Karoline hosted a brunch. For her local volunteer group, they drank mimosas in the garden, debated school policy, and laughed louder than usual. The Rolls stayed parked in the driveway, a quiet reminder of the line between grace and power. 2 weeks later, the cafe changed its hiring policy. Words like culture fit disappeared from the training manual. Lou no longer brought up politics. During pre-shift meetings, a flyer went up near the register about embracing diversity of thought. A little late but still. Karoline didn't go back. She didn't need to. She'd made her point, not with rage, not with hashtags, but with calm certainty. And maybe a little style. She told Davis it wasn't about revenge. It was about reminding people. There are many ways to speak loudly and sometimes silence wrapped in velvet speaks the loudest of all. Asterisk. The morning after the Rolls-Royce moment, Karoline woke up to over 24 missed calls. Some from old campaign contacts, others from journalists. A few from numbers she didn't recognize but could guess were connected to local gossip chains. Her inbox was bursting with vague subject lines like "just saw what happened, and that was you." She ignored them. She made breakfast instead: bacon, toast, poached eggs, the kind of slow, deliberate morning that contrasted sharply with the noise brewing outside. Davis scrolled through his phone at the table, half smirking. Asterisk. Local stations running a segment on you. No names, but we know who they're talking about. Asterisk. Karoline didn't flinch. Let them talk. Asterisk. He looked up at her. You sure? You don't want to do an interview? Asterisk. No, she said. I didn't do it for a headline. But that wasn't entirely true. She'd done it for the girls who walked into places with values no one wanted to hear. For the ones who smiled politely through lectures disguised as open dialogue. For the women who were told to be quiet, or, worse, told they were dangerous just for disagreeing. So she made a choice. Later that week, she launched a newsletter. Nothing flashy, just a Substack titled Well-Mannered Rebel. The first post was simple. She told the story. No rage, no bitterness, just facts.com, and clear, with a touch of humor. She wrote, I didn't cry when I got fired. I made coffee. I called my husband, then we drove by, said nothing, and left the rest to silence. Not everything needs a megaphone. Sometimes, all it takes is a luxury sedan and a clean conscience. Asterisk. The post went viral in a quiet kind of way. It didn't explode. It unfolded. Readers shared it in group chats and email threads. Mothers sent it to daughters. Fathers printed it out and left it on kitchen counters. Asterisk. By the following Tuesday, Karoline was invited to speak at a local university. The irony wasn't lost on her. An institution where half the faculty had probably signed petitions against her politics now wanted her on stage to talk about cultural polarization and the cost of candor. She accepted. The auditorium wasn't packed, but it was full enough. The Q&A was the real highlight. A student asked if she regretted not calling out Lou more directly. Karoline paused before answering. Asterisk. If I had, I'd be just like her. I didn't want to prove her right. I wanted to prove her irrelevant. Asterisk. Applause erupted. Not thunderous, but sincere. Asterisk. Things picked up from there. Karoline didn't plan to build a movement, but movements have a way of forming around women who don't flinch. A month later, Well-Mannered Rebel crossed 50,000 subscribers. National outlets picked up her story not because she made a scene, but because she didn't. In a culture obsessed with rage, restraint had become radical. Asterisk. Lou, meanwhile, became a cautionary tale. Not a villain, exactly, but a reminder that intolerance isn't always loud. Sometimes, it wears a smile and serves lattes. Asterisk. The cafe started losing regulars. Not because of boycotts or protests, but because people felt the chill. Something in the place had shifted. The laughter wasn't as full. The music didn't feel as warm. Maybe guilt hung in the air. Or maybe it was just the echo of what had been exposed. Asterisk. Karoline didn't gloat. She moved on. Asterisk. Davis, proud but unbothered, continued splitting time between cities. She often joked that the Rolls had become a town myth. Something locals whispered about like a ghost story. Asterisk. By fall, she'd published a book. Short essays, clean chapters, titled Grace Isn't Cowardice. It landed on a few bestseller lists, and stayed there longer than expected. Asterisk. She started hosting small salons at her home. Nothing political on the surface, just women, wine, books, and the occasional quiet debate. No shouting, no finger pointing, just the lost art of adult conversation. Asterisk. And in all this, Karoline stayed the same. Poised, still, intentional. Asterisk. The liberal manager who fired her never apologized. That was fine. Karoline never needed her to. The lesson wasn't in the car, or the coffee, or the attention. The lesson was in the stillness. In the strength to walk away without setting fire to the place. In understanding that sometimes, the best revenge is having nothing to prove. Asterisk. And when young women wrote to her, confused about whether to speak up or stay small, she gave the same answer every time. Asterisk. Speak, but don't scream. Show up, but don't shrink. And when they try to push you out, leave with dignity so big they'll hear it echo every morning when they open their doors. Asterisk. She paused each time before signing off. Always the same way. Yours in rebellion with manners. Always. Karoline. Asterisk. Spring came late that year. Asterisk. The trees outside Karoline's window stayed bare longer than usual. Branches stubborn against the thaw. But in her home, warmth bloomed early. Letters poured in now, not just emails, but real ones. Handwritten notes, on thick cardstock, folded into envelopes that smelled faintly of perfume or wood smoke. Some were from teenagers, some from grandmothers. A surprising number from men, quiet husbands, teachers, bros grateful for a voice that didn't rise to anger, but still stood its ground. Karoline read every one. One note from a in Iowa stayed with her for days. Asterisk, I used to think I had to become angry to be strong. But then, I read your piece. Now I think maybe strength is something quieter. Something still. Asterisk, she folded it carefully. Slid it into a small wooden box where she kept keepsakes that mattered. A box she'd once filled with campaign pins and press badges now held letters, clippings, and folded programs from events she never thought she'd be invited to. Asterisk, one such event was a roundtable in DCIA, private gathering hosted by a think tank that had previously kept their distance from her. The invitation was brief, almost awkward in its careful wording, as if they weren't sure how to apologize for having underestimated her. Asterisk, she went anyway. Asterisk, in a room of voices sharpened by ambition and nerves. Karoline didn't raise hers once. She didn't need to. People leaned in when she spoke. She didn't bring charts or numbers, just ideas, grounded in experience. And when the room asked her how we fix the division, how we restore dignity to disagreements, she simply said, asterisk, start by treating people like they can handle the truth, then actually tell it to them. Asterisk, that line ended up quoted on a dozen blogs and a few news sites. But Karoline didn't care much about where her words landed. She cared more about who they helped stand taller the next morning. Asterisk, back home, life didn't change much. She still walked her dog every evening, still made Davis laugh with her dry jokes, still drank her coffee black. The Rolls wasn't driven often, but every so often, she'd ask Davis to take it out. Not for the look of it, but for the memory. The reminder of what quiet strength can sound like when it rolls into a parking lot on a cold morning. Asterisk, people in town still whispered. Some gossiped, some praised, some called her bold, some called her smug. Asterisk, she didn't mind. She knew who she was, and more importantly, she knew why she had walked out of that cafe without a word. It had never been about proving Lou wrong, it had been about proving herself right. Then came the podcast. Asterisk, at first, she declined the offers. Dozens of them. Everyone wanted to talk to the woman with the Rolls-Royce moment. But most shows wanted spectacle, not substance. They wanted sound bites, not sentences. She refused. Asterisk, until one reached out, a small independent show, hosted by a former Marine turned journalist. No flashy intro music, no shouting, just questions, space, and time to answer. She said yes. The interview lasted 2 hours. The host asked thoughtful questions, let her talk, challenged her gently. When he asked what she would say to her former manager if given the chance, Karoline didn't pause. Asterisk, I'd say thank you. Not sarcastically, not bitterly, just honestly. Because sometimes, being pushed out is the only way to realize how much bigger your space is supposed to be. It was downloaded over 2 million times in a week. After that, her reach expanded in ways she hadn't planned. A small publishing house offered her an imprint of her own. She accepted and began curating books by other voices like hers, measured, firm, principled, not loud, but lasting. Asterisk, soon, Well-Mannered Rebel became more than a newsletter. It became a small movement. Book clubs started popping up under its name. Panels were hosted. Quiet salons multiplied in other towns, other cities. People craving decency without compromise gathered under that banner. No official rules, no slogans, just an agreement. We can disagree without surrendering grace. It wasn't always easy. There were critics, always are. Some said she was too soft. Others said she was too political. One magazine tried to call her a new kind of conservative influencer, as if reducing her to a brand made her less threatening. Karoline just kept writing and living. Asterisk, one day, more than a year after the cafe incident, she was walking through town when she saw Lou. Asterisk, she hadn't planned on it. It was just one of those small-town collisions that happen when both people hope to avoid each other. But there they were, on the same sidewalk. Lou looked thinner, tired. There was no apron, no pride in her posture. Asterisk, Karoline smiled politely, not cruelly. Just enough. Asterisk, Lou opened her mouth, then closed it again. A pause. Then finally, asterisk, you made a whole thing out of it, huh? Asterisk, Karoline tilted her head. No, you did. I just didn't run from it. Asterisk, they stood in silence for a moment. The sun filtered through the clouds. Somewhere, a church bell rang the hour. Asterisk, then Karoline added, not unkindly. You know, if you'd just treated me like a person instead of a symbol, none of it would have happened. Asterisk, Lou didn't answer, just nodded once, awkwardly, and walked past. Karoline didn't look back. That night, she made lemon pasta, poured herself a glass of wine, and lit the candles on the patio. Davis came home an hour later. She was already outside, laptop closed, dog curled at her feet. Asterisk, he kissed her on the head and sat beside her. You good? Asterisk, she nodded. Better than I ever thought I'd be. Asterisk, he looked out at the fading sky. You know, that car. Asterisk, she laughed. If you say it was your idea, asterisk, no, just ... kind of poetic, don't you think? Asterisk, Karoline smiled at the memory, at the silence that said more than shouting ever could. Asterisk, yeah, she said. Poetic enough. Asterisk, and somewhere, tucked into inboxes and bookshelves and notebooks across the country, her words remained. A reminder that you don't have to fight dirty to win. That class is not weakness. That being well-mannered in a chaotic world might just be the boldest rebellion of all. Asterisk, autumn arrived quietly, painting the trees in amber and rust. Karoline watched it from her office window as she revised a foreword for the next book under her imprint. It was a memoir from a woman in Ohio who had left her tech job after being pushed out for refusing to hide her beliefs. Different story, same pattern. The stories kept coming. Some made her cry. Some made her furious. Some made her proud. All of them reminded her of why she had walked out of that cafe and why she kept writing, kept speaking, kept holding space for others who'd been silenced, minimized, or mocked for thinking differently. Asterisk, her voice wasn't just her own anymore. It had become a current, subtle but steady, moving beneath the noise. She'd struck a chord, not because she was extreme, but because she wasn't. In a time when people had learned to shout to be heard, Karoline had whispered and still reached thousands. Asterisk, by Thanksgiving, the newsletter had doubled in readership. Again, her second book, Unconsolable, Why Conviction is Louder Than Outrage, hit number 3 on the nonfiction list. It wasn't the kind of success that flooded airports or talk shows. But it wasn't supposed to be. Asterisk, it was the kind of success that lived in home libraries and bedside tables. That showed up in discussions after dinner. That lasted. Asterisk, she spent more time walking through her neighborhood now. Less about exercise, more about listening. She liked hearing what people weren't saying. The man who nodded silently at her each morning. The teenager who lingered a few seconds too long before asking, "Are you?" Her. The women who stopped her gently in the grocery store and said, "Thank you," like it was the end of a prayer. Asterisk, there was a weight to it, a quiet responsibility. But Karoline carried it well, with the same posture she had that day at the cafe, upright.com, untouched by smallness. Asterisk, winter crept in. The snow came early, thick and clean. One evening, while the fire crackled in the hearth, Davis read aloud a message she'd received from a young city councilwoman in Idaho. Asterisk, your story helped me not resign. I stayed, I fought for my place at the table, and I won. Thank you for not disappearing when it would have been easier. Karoline closed her eyes and breathed it in. Night, she wrote something new. A letter, not a post, not a chapter, just a letter to no one and everyone at once. It read, Asterisk, there's power in leaving quietly, but only if you do it on your own terms. Never let them shrink you. Never let them confuse your silence with surrender. You do not need their stage. Build your own. And when the world is finally ready to listen, make sure you're still standing calm, steady, and entirely yourself. Asterisk, she didn't publish it. Not right away. Asterisk, instead, she folded it and slid it into the box with the letters and the memories. For someday, for someone, asterisk, as the snow kept falling, Karoline Leavitt remained exactly what she had always been, even before the world noticed a woman grounded, unshaken, and never once tempted to trade dignity for attention. Asterisk, and the cafe. Asterisk, it still stood, on the corner, still served the same lattes, but fewer people walked through its door. Something about the place felt thinner now, like the warmth had faded. Like people remembered what had happened and never quite forgot. Asterisk, Lou kept her head down. The staff changed. The slogans on the walls disappeared one by one. No more chalkboard politics. No more whispered jokes. Just coffee, made quietly, in a shop that once mistook arrogance for virtue. Asterisk, and every now and then, the sound of a quiet engine, sleek, polished, and unbothered, would pass by that corner again. Not to make a statement. Just on the way somewhere better. Asterisk, in early January, a thin layer of ice glistened across the roads, and the town seemed slower, quieter. The holidays had passed, and the year had begun with a sort of watchful calm. Karoline welcomed it. She'd never been one for resolutions, but she liked the stillness of a fresh start. No noise, no expectations, just a quiet hum of forward motion. Asterisk, one morning, while making tea in the kitchen, her phone buzzed. Asterisk, it was a message from a former staffer on her congressional campaign, a young intern named Amelia, who had once nervously asked for advice on public speaking. Karoline had told her then, don't speak to impress, speak to clarify. Amelia remembered. Now the message read, I'm running. Local school board. I thought you should know. Because you showed me I could. Asterisk, Karoline stood still for a moment, the kettle whistling behind her. Asterisk, that's what it had become, one woman, showing another that she could, and then another, and another. A ripple, not a wave, not a roar, just something sure and spreading. Asterisk, she responded simply, proud of you. Lead with grace. Fight with facts. Let them underestimate you, it helps. Asterisk, that week, she started recording a limited series podcast. Just 6 episodes. Each one centered on a story hers. Others, all stitched together with the common thread of courage without chaos. She called it The Quiet Spine. It wasn't about politics, not directly. It was about what happens when you don't yield to pressure, about how integrity feels when you wear it like armor. Asterisk, the podcast climbed to the top of several charts. Again, no marketing blitz, just word of mouth. People were hungry for something without venom. They were tired of being told their only choices were rage or retreat. Asterisk, one episode featured a teacher who'd been removed from her classroom for refusing to enforce speech codes that punished opinion. Another focused on a father who stood up at a town hall to defend his daughter's right to speak. And one was just Karoline reading her old letter aloud, the one she had folded and never published. It resonated more than she expected. After that, more doors opened. Asterisk, not literal ones, didn't need any, but doors and hearts and homes and places where people had grown afraid to say what they really thought. They started quoting her at dinners, sharing her words on Sunday mornings, reading them to daughters as bedtime stories. She'd never meant to become a voice for anyone else. Asterisk, but maybe that was the point. The best voices don't speak for others. They just speak so clearly that others remember they have one too. Asterisk, one evening, in early March, Karoline was invited to a gathering hosted by a national women's group, not one aligned with her politically, but one curious enough to hear her out. She accepted. Asterisk, it was held in a glass-walled room overlooking a snowy skyline. She stood before women who'd likely disagreed with her in a dozen editorials, and told them, asterisk, I'm not here to make you agree with me. I'm here because someone once told me disagreement was dangerous, and I believed them until I learned it's not disagreement that's dangerous. It's the fear of having it. If we lose the ability to hear each other, we lose everything. Asterisk, silence followed. Then, applause. Then, hands raised. And conversations began, not easy ones, but real ones. They didn't all like her. They didn't need to, but they respected her. Asterisk, later, one attendee approached her and said quietly, I was part of a group that tried to get you deplatformed years ago. I didn't know you. I just knew what people said. I was wrong. Asterisk, Karoline smiled. It happens. What matters is what you do next. Asterisk, the woman nodded, eyes glassy. Thank you for coming anyway. Asterisk, Karoline left that night in her usual quiet way. No grand exit. No posed photos. Just a steady walk to the elevator. Coat wrapped tight, mind clear. Asterisk, at home. Davis waited with a fire already burning, and music low in the background. She dropped her bag on the chair and sat beside him. Asterisk, how was it? Asterisk, she leaned her head back and exhaled. Honest, that's all I ask for now. Asterisk, he looked over at her. You ever think about running again? Asterisk, she smiled faintly. No, not for now. Maybe not ever. There are other ways to lead. And it was true. Because leadership, she had learned, wasn't always behind a podium or in front of a camera. Sometimes it was in a kitchen, replying to messages that came at midnight. Sometimes it was in the space she made for another woman to stand without flinching. Sometimes it was in the sentence she didn't say, the insult she didn't return, the dignity she refused to discard even when pushed. Spring came early that year, the trees blossomed quickly, and the sun returned with purpose. Karoline walked through town again, familiar streets now echoing differently, not louder, just clearer. Asterisk, the cafe still stood. She passed it often. She never looked inside. She didn't need to. She had outgrown it. And somewhere, parked quietly, in a shaded driveway, a black Rolls-Royce waited, not as a trophy, not as a symbol, just a reminder that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is leave the room with your head high and your values unshaken. Asterisk, and let the silence speak louder than anything you could ever say. Asterisk, summer came with a hush that felt like grace. Asterisk, Karoline found herself waking earlier than usual, drawn to the sunrise and the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. Her routine had changed subtly. Fewer interviews, more reading, fewer speaking engagements, more long walks through unfamiliar parts of town, just to remember how much of the world existed outside of noise. Asterisk, she hadn't disappeared, far from it, but she had become selective, purposeful. The calls still came from networks, conferences, op-ed editors, and while she accepted some, she declined more, not out of pride, but peace. She no longer needed the validation. Asterisk, she was writing something new now, not political, not even nonfiction. A novel? Asterisk, it surprised even her. But the story had come like a whisper she couldn't ignore. A woman, not unlike herself, who chooses grace over power, and finds something better on the other side of being misunderstood. The plot wasn't about revenge or redemption, about presence, strength found not in being right, but in being whole. Asterisk, one afternoon, she received a package. No return address. Asterisk, inside was a simple card. No signature, just a short line, handwritten in blue ink. Asterisk, you taught me what dignity looks like. I'll never forget that. Asterisk, beneath the card was a small silver bracelet engraved with a single word, unshaken. She slipped it on without a word. Her inbox, still full daily, had changed in tone. Less outrage, more reflection. People writing not to vent, but to connect. To say, you helped me hold my line. Or, you reminded me not to be ashamed of what I believe. Asterisk, there was a shift happening. Not seismic, not newsworthy, but slow and sure. People were finding their center again. Not all because of her, of course, but she'd been a spark, and that mattered. One evening, she and Davis were invited to a dinner in the next town over, a gathering of artists, writers, teachers, clergy. Not a fundraiser, not a campaign, just a conversation. Asterisk, they sat under strings of lights in someone's backyard, as warm air carried laughter through the dusk. Asterisk, a woman across the table leaned forward and asked, "What made you stay the course?" After everything, asterisk, Karoline paused. "I didn't stay the course," she said softly. "I found a better one. The kind where you don't lead crowds, you lead quietly, one person at a time." Asterisk, the woman smiled. "That's rarer than ever." Asterisk, maybe, but it shouldn't be. Asterisk, as they drove home. Davis said, "You've changed more minds by staying calm than most do by shouting for decades." Asterisk, Karoline looked out the window. "Not minds," she said, "hearts, and not changed. Just reminded. Most people already know what's true. They just forget when everyone around them's yelling." Asterisk, the roads were empty. The sky full of stars. The kind of night that makes you believe in slow, steady things. Asterisk, later that summer, she received word that Amelia, her former intern, had won her school board seat, with 58% of the vote. Asterisk, the first thing she did was issue a local resolution about open dialogue in classrooms, civil discourse. Courage to hear the other side. She quoted Karoline in her statement. Karoline read it in her kitchen with the morning light spilling across the table. Then she folded it up, walked to her box, and added it to the others. She no longer needed to keep the memories, but she liked having them nearby. Asterisk, as the year wore on, her novel neared completion. The draft had taken its shape, and with each chapter, her own story seemed to settle further into the background. Not forgotten, just integrated. Asterisk, she wrote most mornings with the window open, a cup of tea nearby, the sound of leaves moving gently through the trees. The Rolls stayed in the garage. Now, she hadn't driven it in weeks. It had served its purpose. One day in early autumn, she found herself back on the street where the cafe still stood. She hadn't meant to end up there, it just happened. The place had changed again. The new name, new colors. Lou was long gone. She didn't go in. She didn't need to. Asterisk. She walked past with the same quiet dignity she had that morning, long ago, unapologetic, unbothered, unshaken. Asterisk, a few blocks away. A teenage girl walking with her mother looked up suddenly. Recognition, lighting her face. She whispered something. Her mother turned to glance. Then they both smiled. Asterisk, Karoline smiled back. Just once, just enough. Asterisk, when she got home that day, she sat on the porch and opened a fresh notebook. At the top of the first page, she wrote, "Some people leave quietly because they're defeated. Some people leave quietly because they're done." Asterisk. "And some people leave quietly because they've already won." Asterisk. Then, she closed the book and looked out toward the horizon. She didn't know exactly what came next. But she knew this much. She didn't need to raise her voice to make it heard. She didn't need anyone's permission to keep walking forward. Asterisk, and she would never ever her piece for their approval. Not now, not again, not ever.